Welcome to your deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're tackling a fear, apeirophobia, and the name's pretty intimidating.
It is.
And it is an intimidating feeling.
Yeah.
So apeirophobia, it's more than just fear of vast spaces. Think more about feeling trapped in the infinite expanse of time.
Yeah.
Ever felt overwhelmed by the sheer never-endingness of consciousness?
Yeah.
Like being itself is a cage that you just can't escape.
Right.
We've got a stack of sources: philosophy, religion, psychology. We're going to trace this unsettling feeling and see if maybe there's a way to break free.
It's a fascinating thing about apeirophobia, right? This fear of infinite time can just totally twist into this feeling of being trapped by your own consciousness. It's like suddenly you realize that your mind, your being will just continue forever, no escape.
Yeah, and that's where the real terror sets in for some people.
Right.
It's that concept of eternal existence, and then suddenly life itself feels like a prison.
Right.
So how could being itself be a trap?
Yeah.
I mean, if it feels like a trap, how do we even begin to teach ourselves that it's not a trap?
Well, that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to trace this unsettling feeling through Western thought and see how all these philosophers have grappled with the nature of being. And then we'll shift gears a little bit and see if Eastern philosophy might offer a different perspective or a potential solution.
Okay, let's unpack this a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
We've got some heavy hitters on the table today.
Oh, yeah.
Aristotle, Descartes, Keiji, Nishitani, even some Tibetan Buddhist texts.
Yeah.
Let's just start by defining apeirophobia.
Okay.
It's sometimes associated with the fear of infinite space,
Right.
but we're focusing on its connection to infinite time.
Exactly. It's that sense of total entrapment in infinite time, the never-endingness of consciousness itself that can just be so overwhelming. Yeah.
So we're not talking about, your everyday fear of heights here.
Right.
It's more about feeling trapped by the very fact that you exist and that your consciousness will continue indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
To understand this fear, I think we need to understand how Western thought has approached this concept of being right.
Precisely. And for that, let's go back to the foundations of Western philosophy with Aristotle's Metaphysics. Aristotle, he was one of the first to really grapple with this whole idea of substance, the core of what things are.
Yeah.
The
OG philosophy.
The OG, that's right. And he lays out some really foundational ideas about existence. Mm-hmm. Have you ever felt like your sense of self is just this thin layer on top of something much vaster and unknowable?
I think we all have.
That's the kind of territory that Aristotle was exploring.
Okay, so he's saying there's this basic essence of being, like this fundamental stuff that underlies everything.
Yeah.
And then how we perceive things, their form, their qualities, those are kind of secondary to their basic essence of being.
Exactly. And when we bring in ideas of infinity, of never-endingness, well, that can start to feel a little claustrophobic when applied to our own existence.
You mean like if we apply this concept of infinity to this fundamental stuff that makes up our being, and suddenly this idea of existing forever starts to feel less like a blissful eternity and more like a prison sentence.
That's the line of thinking.
Wow.
And it's a fear that has resonated throughout the history of Western thought.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of resonating, let's fast forward a few centuries and consider another philosophical giant, Descartes.
Okay.
And we've got his Meditations on the table today.
Descartes, another cornerstone of Western thought.
You got it.
He famously tackled the problem of doubt head on, that whole cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
But does he help us escape this feeling of being stuck in existence?
Well, what's interesting is his exploration of that mind-body connection.
Okay.
He uses the power of imagination to argue for the existence of a physical world that's outside our thoughts.
So he's saying because we can imagine things beyond our own minds, there must be a reality external to our own being.
That's one way to look at it.
Is that how he's helping us kind of escape that feeling of being trapped?
Well, it's one interpretation. By separating mind and body, Descartes opens up possibilities, suggesting that our being might not be entirely limited to just our own internal experience. Mm-hmm. He also emphasizes the power of reason and doubt, suggesting that we have the capacity to question and challenge our own perceptions, even the perception of being trapped.
So maybe by recognizing the distinction between mind and body and using reason to question our assumptions about being, maybe we can start to loosen the grip of that feeling of eternal entrapment.
That's the hope.
Okay, so does that kind of lead us to Eastern philosophies?
That's a fascinating transition. If Western thought, in a way, lays out the problem of feeling trapped by the infinite nature of being, does Eastern philosophy offer a potential solution?
Okay, so here's where things get really interesting.
I love it when we get to this part.
So we have excerpts from Religion and Nothingness by Keiji Nishitani, a prominent Japanese philosopher, and this ties into Buddhism somehow.
It does exactly, God. Nishitani connects Buddhist concepts, particularly the idea of sunyata, or emptiness, to this whole issue of apeirophobia.
Emptiness. That honestly doesn't sound very comforting.
Doesn't it?
I mean, it makes me think of nothingness.
Right.
Which seems to reinforce that sense of infinite void.
Right.
Not offer an escape from it.
But that's where the twist comes in.
Okay.
In Buddhist thought, emptiness isn't about nothingness or annihilation.
Okay.
It's about the idea that things lack inherent permanent existence.
Okay.
And this includes the self.
Okay, so are we saying then that the self we perceive as trapped isn't actually a solid, permanent thing?
That's the line of thinking.
Okay.
It's more fluid, more impermanent than we might initially believe.
So if the self isn't this fixed, unchanging entity,
right,
then the idea of being eternally trapped starts to lose its power.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If you're trapped in a cage, both the cage and the you that feels trapped have to be real solid, separate things.
Right.
But what if both are ultimately illusions?
If both lack that inherent independent existence,
right,
then the whole idea of being trapped starts to kind of dissolve.
Yeah, it does. It starts to kind of fall apart.
So you're saying by recognizing the emptiness of both self and the perceived trap of infinite time, we can free ourselves from apeirophobia.
That's the potential offered by this line of thinking.
Why?
It's not about denying the experience of fear or the vastness of time.
Right.
It's about seeing those experiences differently.
Okay.
And understanding them from a perspective that doesn't solidify them into this inescapable prison.
This is definitely making me think about time and existence in a whole new way.
It's a big one.
But I have to admit, it's still a little hard to grasp this whole idea of emptiness.
I understand.
It's so different from how we usually think about ourselves in the world.
It's a radical shift in perspective, but to make it a bit more tangible, think of a clear sky.
Okay.
It appears empty, but it's actually full of potential. Full of constantly changing weather patterns, light energy. Emptiness in this sense isn't about nothingness. It's about potential and change.
So instead of seeing emptiness as a void, I should see it as a space of possibility.
Exactly.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
And it's a perspective that's further developed in Tibetan Buddhism, where we encountered this fascinating idea of the body as a mandala.
Yes. We also looked at some Tibetan Buddhist texts, particularly Intro to Tibetan Buddhism.
Yeah.
And this whole body as a mandala thing popped up.
Right.
Now, I understand that a mandala is a complex, beautiful circular symbol used in Tibetan Buddhism to represent the universe and our place in it.
It's a powerful visual representation of the interconnectedness of everything, a microcosm of the cosmos.
Wow.
Imagine a cosmic blueprint where every part is interconnected and creating this intricate, beautiful pattern that's the essence of a mandala.
Okay. But how does seeing my body as a mandala help with feeling trapped by my own being? I mean, it still seems like a contained structure.
Well, it's about shifting the perspective. Instead of seeing the body as this limited, confined self, the body as a mandala concept encourages us to see ourselves as a reflection of the vast interconnected universe.
Okay.
So the body becomes not a prison, but a microcosm reflecting the boundless cosmos.
So instead of feeling trapped, it's about feeling like a part of something much larger than ourselves. A small but significant part of this infinite, ever-changing universe.
Right.
And that could help alleviate the fear associated with apeirophobia.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective can be profoundly liberating. It allows us to see our being not as a static, isolated thing, but as a dynamic, interconnected part of this endlessly unfolding reality. But I think it's time we move on to part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
To explore this further.
All right, let's do it.
So, we've been talking about escaping this feeling of being trapped by infinite time, but maybe the real key lies in understanding our relationship with finitude.
With finitude?
Yeah, with our own mortality.
Okay, that's an interesting twist. So instead of trying to escape the infinite, we should be focusing on the finite.
Exactly.
On the fact that our time is limited.
Think about it. It's often the awareness of our own mortality that gives life meaning and urgency.
Okay.
It's that recognition that our time is precious, that we don't have an eternity to waste, that can really motivate us to live more fully, more authentically.
So you're saying that by embracing our own finitude, by accepting the reality of death, we can actually find a sense of freedom from that feeling of being trapped in this endless time.
That's the paradox. The fear of infinite time often arises from this fear of meaninglessness, of being lost in an endless void.
Yeah.
But it's our finite existence with its inherent limitations that creates the conditions for meaning and purpose.
It's like a sculptor shaping a piece of clay.
Right.
The limitations of the material, its finite boundaries, are what allow the artist to create something beautiful and meaningful.
Exactly. And in a similar way, the limitations of our own existence, the knowledge that our time is finite, can be that catalyst for us to create a life of meaning and purpose.
Okay, so how do we actually embrace this idea of finitude?
That's a good question.
How do we move from a place of fear to a place of acceptance and even, dare I say, gratitude for the limited time we have?
Well, many spiritual traditions emphasize the importance of mindfulness, of being fully present in each moment.
Okay.
By focusing on the present, we can kind of escape the anxieties of the past and the uncertainties of the future.
That makes sense. It's like when you're truly absorbed in an activity, whether it's creating art, listening to music, or even having a meaningful conversation,
right,
you kind of lose track of time.
Yeah.
You're not worried about the past or the future. You're simply immersed in the present moment.
Exactly. And in those moments, the sense of time as a trap, as this endless, inescapable continuum, kind of fades away.
It's like we're stepping outside of time, even if just for a little while.
Yeah, and that's where we can find true liberation, not in escaping time, but in transcending our limited perception of it.
So by cultivating mindfulness, by embracing the present moment, we can start to free ourselves from that feeling of being trapped in time in being itself.
And as we become more comfortable with the reality of our own finitude, with the impermanence of all things, we can begin to see time not as a prison, but as a canvas upon which we can create a life of meaning and beauty.
Okay, so we've seen how Western thought frames the problem of apeirophobia,
right?
This feeling of being trapped by the infinite nature of being. And we've started to explore how Eastern thought might offer a different perspective, one that emphasizes emptiness, impermanence, and interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Are there any, practices or techniques that can help us actually experience this shift in perspective?
Absolutely. And that's where practices like meditation come in. They're central to many Eastern traditions, including Buddhism.
Okay. Meditation. I've tried it before, but I always find my mind racing, filled with thoughts, and it never seems to last very long.
Well, the goal of meditation in these traditions isn't necessarily to empty the mind of all thoughts, but to become aware of their nature, to see them as arising and passing phenomena, not solid defining aspects of the self.
So instead of being caught up in the thoughts, you're observing them, seeing them come and go.
Yeah.
Isn't that really difficult to do?
It can be challenging at first, but with practice, you can develop a sense of space. A sense of separation from those thoughts. And that space, that separation, is a glimpse of emptiness.
Okay.
That potential for change we were talking about earlier.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not about stopping the thoughts. It's about changing our relationship to them, seeing them from a different perspective.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, that glimpse of emptiness, can have a profound impact on how we experience the world and ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together by practicing meditation. We can begin to experience this emptiness,
right?
This lack of inherent independent existence, and that experience can help us break free from the feeling of being trapped by the infinite, unchanging nature of being.
That's the potential offered by these practices. They offer a way to move from a sense of fear and confinement to a sense of freedom and liberation.
Okay, but wouldn't that make life feel meaningless? If there's no solid self and everything is impermanent,
yeah,
does anything really matter?
That's a great question, and one that many people wrestle with. But think of it this way. If the self is an illusion, who or what is it that experiences freedom or liberation?
Okay.
The very fact that we can ask these questions, that we can experience apeirophobia in the first place, points to a deeper awareness, a ground of being that's beyond our usual conceptual frameworks.
So it's not that nothing matters.
Right.
It's that things matter in a different way.
Exactly.
A more expansive way.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything, seeing our lives as part of this larger web of meaning and purpose.
Okay.
And this is illustrated beautifully in a Zen Buddhist teaching story about a monk who was obsessed with achieving enlightenment.
Okay.
He spent years meditating and practicing, but always felt like something was missing. One day, he met an old woman by a stream, and she just seemed perfectly at peace.
Oh, wow.
And the monk, frustrated, asked her how she found such peace and escaped the feeling of being trapped in the cycle of existence.
What did she say?
She simply replied, "I don't escape it, I simply flow with it like the water in this stream."
Wow.
The monk realized he had been creating his own suffering by clinging to this fixed idea of himself and enlightenment.
Yeah.
He had been trying to escape the flow of time instead of embracing it.
So the woman's simple wisdom helped him break free from his self-imposed trap.
Precisely. It's a wisdom that's echoed in many Eastern traditions, you know. It's about recognizing that our true nature isn't separate from the ever-changing flow of the universe.
Okay.
Finding liberation not through escape, but through acceptance, through embracing the present moment.
This is giving me a lot to think about. So if that sense of infinite time has ever felt overwhelming to you, maybe it's time to shift your focus instead of trying to escape the infinite time.
Yeah.
Maybe the answer lies in embracing the finite, in recognizing the impermanence of all things, including the self that feels trapped. Western thought lays out the problem, but Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism, offers tools to reframe our relationship with being, explore those ideas. Maybe that's the next step in your own personal deep dive.